Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to get started. Welcome to today's webinar, Resource Management 2.0, the next chapter in achieving just-in-time resourcing. My name is Thomas Meredith, and I am the Marketing Director for RTM Consulting. I'll be moderating today's webcast. I still see people logging in, but we do have a lot to get to today, a lot of content to cover, and so we're going to get right to it. Before we begin, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. We do make a copy of the presentation slides available if you're interested. So just email a request to info@rtmconsulting.net. That's info@rtmconsulting.net. Email us your request and we will follow up with a PDF copy of the presentation. Again, we are also recording the webcast. Probably later this afternoon, first thing tomorrow morning, you will receive an email with a link to hear the recording, so you can listen back at your convenience. Also, please feel free to ask questions. We won't be answering questions during the webcast because we do have a lot to cover, but we've got some time at the end for a brief Q&A session. So throughout the webcast, please feel free to put your questions there into the question section of your go-to webinar panel. I'll be collecting those, and we'll spend some time at the end of the webcast answering those questions. Also, for those interested, there is an opportunity to claim a PDU credit for this webcast. So after the webinar, during our Q&A session, we will bring up a slide that has that information necessary if you're looking to claim a PDU for today's web-based instruction. Okay, I think I've covered everything, so we'll get started. Presenting today's webinar on Resource Management 2.0 is Randy Mislovic. Randy is CEO and founder of RTM Consulting, and we're excited to have a co-presenter with us today. Joining Randy will be Richard Bush. Rich is the Director of Professional Services Operations at Informatica. Randy, I believe you're starting us off today, so I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Thomas, and thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon or this morning, depending on your time zone, for Resource Management 2.0. You know, it comes at an interesting time. It was it's been about 5 years, a little bit longer for us actually, since we've been at the process of helping companies transform their resource management capabilities. And we've certainly learned a lot as a consulting company, helping companies with that, and I know that the industry has learned a lot as well. But interesting enough is 5 to 6 years later, a lot of companies in the industry are still struggling with the process of how do you just simply get the right person in the right place at the right moment in time. And so over the last 5, 6 years, as we've been capturing a lot of observations about where are the key breakpoints, so to speak, in people's processes or in their execution, and we're going to talk about specifically those 5 issues as to what we think is still standing between organizations being really, really good at this or not being quite so good at this. So anyway, so that's why we titled this Resource Management 2.0. I'll start with, for those of you who are not familiar with our company, I'll give you a brief introduction to RTM Consulting. Our mission simply is to help consulting, professional, and support services organizations get better at what they do. If you're a services organization, typically embedded in a technology company, we can help you with any form of how to make your services functions run more efficiently and effectively, and that's professional consulting, support, field services, educational services, managed services. We cover the whole spectrum of services operations. We've been in business since 2007. At our heart, we are both management and operational consultants. Most of the people in the company are practitioners by heritage, and so we're all roll up the sleeves kind of people and love to get in there and do the kind of work that you and the services organizations do every day. We help companies with services transformation across a broad range of topics. We've been at the resource management was the first service that we offered in the company, and we've been at it and have grown into the largest provider, we believe, in resource management consulting services with our just-in-time resourcing solutions, and I'll talk more about that today. So got more than 100 clients globally, and Again, we can help you across a full spectrum of whether it's consulting, training, mentoring, staffing, software tools. We can help you transform your services operation into something more efficient and effective. This is me. I'm Randy Mislevic again. I had a number of jobs in the industry. I've been in the technology industry my entire career, and I had just say two larger experiences, one at IBM and then the second running a very large professional services organization at a company here in Cincinnati called Convergys, where we ran a big PS operation across with 1,600 employees across 31 countries and 6 different continents, and learned a lot about the processes of how do you effectively get the right person in the right place at the right time. So that's a little bit about me. Again, just a sample of our clients. You can find these on our website. We proudly display our satisfied clients and are happy to provide references when people engage us. So a little bit about who we serve. And with that, I'll dive into our agenda for this afternoon. 5 topics. I want to just get a simple grounding in what resource management is, and so when I'm talking about resource management, at least you understand what we use definitionally around that. Talk about some of the drivers of our performance and implications for change, and those are the things that will help me lead to the discussion of what are the 5 biggest barriers we continue to see to companies being successful at this. Talk a little bit about the benefits of why it's companies should be spending time with this, and then last but certainly not least is Rich Bush. I'm just delighted to have him join us. Informatica has been a client for a number of years, and Rich is an executive there who's led a transformation of their resource management capabilities from what it used to be to what it is today, and I think he's got a lot of good perspectives to share from a user point of view. So with that, I'll just dive right into some definitional things. I'll start with why we're here is I won't read everything off this slide, but simply to say that we've all heard one of these phrases, or by the way, or said one of these phrases at one point in time. I have no idea what my resource needs are going to be 2 or 3, 4 months out. I know my revenue forecast. How do I get a people forecast? Where did that project come from? Lots of things going on in our busy worlds around project management and getting the right person in the right place, simply the right moment in time. And so I'll just say again, when it comes to how we define it, different people might describe resource management differently, and just so you understand what I'm talking about as I'm going through this today, and I think Rich shares a similar definition, is what is it? Staffing, human resources, recruiting, a function, who does it, who needs it. For us, it's simply getting the right person in the right place at the right moment in time. And we have a trademark solution called Just-in-Time Resourcing, which Informatica is an adopter, and quite a few other of our clients are, and we'll be talking more about that in a moment here. So why is this important? Any services organization, most of your cost is tied up in people. And so really simply is just look at this grid and kind of figure out how many consultants you have and multiply that times the number of improvement points in utilization, whether it be billable utilization or, by the way, just looking at increasing the amount of revenues and seeing the impact on their operating incomes. But small improvements in utilization can have a big bottom line impact. And I've said many times before, when you get underneath the underpinnings of project performance, what causes projects to go well, what causes projects to not go well, the single thing that stands out the most in project failures from our observation research has been I simply can't get the right person in the right place at the right time. And it has implications on cost, quality, customer satisfaction, predictability, et cetera. So, and there's a lot of other benefits to doing this well: reduced hiring and training, improving preparedness, reduced attrition. I've tried to capture some of that on another slide here I'll show in a moment. But this is a data point from TSI, the Technology Services Industry Association. And I wanted to use this because I think it really draws an important conclusion for me, is that organizations often plan for a certain level of utilization, but generally speaking, tend to not achieve exactly what they were looking for. And it doesn't mean that somebody here on the phone hasn't done better than what they planned for, But overall, the averages say that, that's not the case, as most companies fail to achieve even what they're trying to accomplish, let alone get to some benchmark standard. And so, and again, back to the point real simply is that if I had, in this case, $100 million PS business with 400 FTEs, at what I just call an average cost for those employees here in the United States is really even $4.4 million on the table. So big implications of not doing this well. So let me move on to drivers of RM performance and implications for change. I look at this, I've been at it a long time, and I look at this, quite frankly, really, really simply. And the simple way that I like to look at it is that utilization has two major drivers, simply supply and demand. Now, as all of you know, there's a lot that goes on underneath those is, what is my supply and what, at what level, where are the people, what are their skills, what do they cost me, how competent are they at the things they need to do. And at the same time on the demand side is, can I really look out 2, 3, 4, 5 months and really get a good review of my demand, because I've got to hook that up with what I'm going to be expected to supply so I can do some pre-planning, because people and skills don't just necessarily show up on a moment's notice. On the other side of the equation is this, labor cost and attrition, and those things are generally impacted by our ability to follow a disciplined process to manage efficient use of those people, but also today is really doing a much better job of data analysis, is understanding how do I use labor, am I using labor in the right places, am I using it in the right way, am I overskilling projects, am I underskilling projects, can I move certain types of work offshore, should I move certain types of work back onshore, lots of things that occur. And so these things, at the PSO level are, I'll just say, the big major performance drivers that you should be concerned about. And then at the enterprise level, of course, these things all impact revenue, gross margins, and certainly project performance, which most people care about. I wanted to show this next page because I think it's really important that we do a lot of assessments of people's resource management capabilities. And I can tell you that 100% of the time, we find three things that are typically true in every situation. And I'm sure that there's somebody out there today that doesn't fit this, but most of the time we go into an organization looking for resource management capabilities, how they're executing. We find some simple things there. One is that you have this small bubble of people at the top of the utilization chart that are really working hard there. And by the way, we see these numbers, we have 80 plus on a chart, but we a lot of times see this 110, 120%. And then we see this big group of cluster of people in the middle that are averaging, just say kind of typical or a little bit below. And then at the bottom, we find that we have a group of people, big bubble of people that are just not nearly fully utilized. And by the way, a lot of times not an efficient use of contractors. I had a person on staff and used a contractor when I probably could have found a person inside my own team. And so we find some of the underpinnings of that are resource management too many times is focused tactically as opposed to strategically. And and then when we get underneath these things, we start looking at process things like forecasting. Is a lot of organizations are looking back 10 days or out 20 days maybe, and that's just not enough of a window to do a good job of managing human resources, because again, people and skills don't necessarily show up at a moment's notice. And so, it drives things like that. People tend to want to rely on a handful of experts, and they don't have the right kind of visibility, and that brings them back again to the same experts, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of things that we see that typically get in the way, and provide some data again here to make the point I made earlier, is that 5 or 6 years later, as we've been watching what the industry's been doing, utilization is actually trending down. And again, this is Technology Services Industry Association data. We think it's really good research and does a good job of mirroring what we think is going on in the broader industry. But generally, industry utilization is trending down, and so what I want to do is spend the bulk of my time talking about 5 things that we have found as an organization that tend to become the biggest barriers as to why people can't break through to get into what I will affectionately call just-in-time resourcing. So here they are. I'll start with number one on the list is organizational silos. And I'll come back and I'm going to describe each of these in a little bit more detail. But those silos might be departmental, they might be geo, they might be along some kind of a product line support or whatever, but we have human beings that are in organizations and are somehow a wall is put around them to keep the free flowing of resources across an organization. And we strongly encourage organizations to think about their resource pool as assets of the corporation, not assets of a particular department. And I recognize it has both process and management implications, and I'll talk about those. Number two, lack of strong RM process discipline. I quite frankly am really surprised that project management, quality management processes are well matured in the industry, and there's whether you're using some PMI methodology or ISO 9000 for quality management, there's lots of money has been spent in companies on project and quality processes, but not a lot of time and attention has been spent in the industry on resource management processes. And as I mentioned before, our research is really clear and very compelling that most of the time project performance failures don't come down to a project management failure or a quality process failure. It came down to simply I couldn't get the right person in the right place at the right time. So this is really important, and that's why we brought a commercial grade resource management process to the market. We call it Global Resource Management, and it's part of our just-in-time resourcing solution, and I'll talk more about that as well. Weak or no forecasting, kind of hard to do a good job of managing supply and demand if you don't know what the future demand need is going to be. PSA technology is, if you've got more than 15, 20 people in your organization, you need a modern automation tool to help you with how to manage resources in your organization in a really highly efficient manner. And lastly is culture change. This is a big one, is organizations have gotten used to how they staff projects for a long time. And this does require moving to a real discipline around resource management, requires some culture change. For some organizations it'll be easy. For some organizations it'll be very hard. Only you'll know within your organization which those are. So let me take each of these one by one. Is organizational silos. Is again some very compelling TSIA data is a huge difference between how well people are able to use their onboard resources when they move to a centralized resource management office versus continue to manage by some kind of siloed structure. In this case, the research looked at it by geo, but we've looked at this data a lot of different ways. I can tell you it comes out the same whether it's department, geo, product line, or whatever. You move to centralized RMO, things generally speaking get better, and generally speaking get a lot better for a whole lot of different reasons. And I recognize, again, that has implications of how you manage people. This doesn't mean everybody reports to a single manager. It does mean we provide a transparent view of where is the human capital in the organization that can potentially be deployed or retrained to be deployed into a variety of different project environments. And when I was running a 1,600-person professional services organization, we had 1,600 people in a transparent database in 31 different countries, and we free-flowed resources all around the globe as a way to drive our cost of delivery down and found a way to do it very, very, very effectively. So lots you can do here, but it's process, PSA tools, and things are really important in order to do that. So speaking of process, is just-in-time resourcing is our trademark solution for how we bring strong process discipline to resource management. So we developed a global resource management process that basically, when you bring those processes together with an automation tool and governance and other things, is we call that the solution in its entirety just-in-time resourcing. And it's really made up of 6 building blocks, starting with a skills inventory that basically tells me who do I have, where are they at, what skills do they have, how much do they cost, where are they located, are they available today, are they on a project, when are they going to become available, what competencies do they have, what products skills inventory, pretty important. Staffing is the mechanism via which I make choices of how I match demand for a project with resources that I have available. And by the way, that process needs to be depersonalized, meaning I don't go back to the same set of experts. I don't go back to my favorite person. I go back to people that I know that my database says are available and capable of handling a particular demand for the project that I'm going to have done. Forecasting, again, is developing a mechanized process via which I can bring together a view of the future and match that up with what my demand is going to be. And I'll show you a specific slide on forecasting. Candidate sourcing and development, again, is okay, so I have all these human resources. How do I develop them? How do I grow them? How do I reskill them? How do I retrain them? How do I hire them quickly? We have an approach to hiring that we call just one-tool recruiting that we found highly effective in being able to locate and deploy people much more quickly than the industry has typically been used to. So there's a lot in that box. Automation tools, so if you don't have one, go get a modern tool. There's a bunch of them out there. I'll talk a bit about that. And then lastly is the processes are only as good as how we focus on managing or governing those processes. If you want to read more about this, you can go to our website, our main website, or just go to justintimeresourcing.com, and it'll take you right to the information on just-in-time resources. You can learn more about that. So with that, I'll go to resource management forecasting. A couple points that I want to make here is every organization has a way in which it looks into the future. Some are really good at this and some are not so good at this, but this is a human resource forecast, a simple graphic that basically says I'm looking at a variety of clients, a variety of projects. I'm kind of predicting what I'm going to start in, what my headcount needs are going to be, and I come up with some kind of a probability-adjusted approach to how many headcount I think I'm going to need at a certain point in time. And you could take this same approach, of course, and make it, as we have done, make it much more granular around, okay, so what skills, where are they going to need to be, et cetera. But to make my point real simply, I've used a real simplified graphic, but this is basically developing an approach to what's my methodology to forecast. How do I start to collaborate with sales through some kind of recurring meetings or other tools that I'm going to have so that I can start to bring a future view of demand, preferably 4, 5, 6 months out, into the process of me marrying that up with what my supply is going to be so that I can be making the choices that I need to make now in order to accomplish that, whether that's going to finding partners or resources or cross-training people or hiring some people or perhaps reducing my workforce to put it more in line with what the expectations of demand are going to be. So anyway, that's a little bit about forecasting. I talked about technology being the right thing here, and I have a lot of different points of view about this, and I try to capture 5 things that I think are really important here. Spreadsheets, by the way, are okay, but there's a lot better out there. If you're a 15 or 20 person organization, you can probably get by with a good spreadsheet and make that work, but you get much bigger than that, and you really need to go find yourself a PSA tool. And one suggestion I would have is, it's interesting, if you look at the data of satisfaction level people that have bought these tools, it's quite low. And it's not because, in our opinion, that the tools aren't good. It's because I think people go into it with the wrong frame of mind relative to letting a salesperson come in and do a nice demo and not taking the time to actually select the tool as opposed to buy one. And so the best advice I could give in this regard is do the right job of requirements planning. Really understand what you need your PSA tool to do. And by the way, help use that as a part as you're defining your RM processes, and recognize that process and technology go together here, just as they do across the whole PSO footprint. And then again, when it comes to a standard for process, is we'll hope you'll take a hard look at our just-in-time resourcing solution and the underlying GRM processes, because we think they're best in class. And again, I believe the only commercially available great process for resource management available in the industry today. So this is a really good, get yourself a good tool and go about picking it in the right manner. And then the last point that I'll make of my 5 points is managing the culture shift. Is Organizations over time, like anything else, build up an approach to how they are used to doing things, and resource management is no different than anything else. It's going to need, if you're going to transform the operation, you're going to need a change management plan to address the anticipated needs. Get senior management behind it. This whole idea of centralizing your view and resources is generally speaking the #1 culture shift issue that we see companies dealing with, but it may or may not be true in your organizations. Building the RMO out and empowering them to staff projects, really, really important, and that's a big shift for a lot of organizations. And lastly is building bridges and sales for better forecasting and project staffing. So those are the things we typically see when it comes to the culture shift. And when we see a lack of a change management plan, we know that the RM transformation is in trouble, because it is a change for people, and it's important that you bring your organization along as opposed to push them into it. So my last topic is the benefits of investing. I did cover earlier some examples of, based on how many people you have, what their costs are, the impacts on cost relative to global utilization, or impacts on your operating income line. A couple things that I wanted to cover here additionally would be just another view from TSIA, and some data on, again, the difference in average net OI moving to a centralized RMO versus doing things either by geo or again, by department or by product line or otherwise. Is generally speaking, we see a big difference in operating income by moving to a centralized approach. So the benefits are undeniable, and the data says that they do occur. In addition to financial benefits, is most projects that fail, again, I mentioned, is not because of the methodology or quality, it's because I couldn't get the right person there at the right moment in time. And when we see people do a better job of RM, project performance inevitably goes up with more projects on time, on budget, better quality. By the way, I know there's some managers out there on the phone today who know they spend a lot more time on trying to fix staffing issues when they really should be spending time doing people development or talking to their clients or actually managing the projects. So we see a big shift in emphasis when we deploy customers in these environments. By the way, the work practitioners, the consultants in the organization, love more structure because there's better predictability. They, fewer calls they get on Sunday afternoon saying, hey, you need to be in Portland, Oregon, tomorrow by 3 o'clock kind of thing. So the work practitioners like the more predictable environment. And lastly is we definitely see a reduction in escalations when this occurs. So my last point on key benefits is we have a thought leadership tab on our website, and if you get underneath that tab, you'll see a drop down for ROI tools. Or if you want to really make it simple for the PS group, we've got an iPhone app that's called the RTMC app, and on that app, one of the 6 apps are right on the front screen of that is a resource utilization calculator. If you're kind of curious as to how 2 points of utilization would impact your financial performance, download this to your iPhone and get going with it. So anyway, that was with that. What I'm going to do is take a minute, and I want to introduce our guest speaker. And we'll tell you, by the way, we're going to, both Rich and myself are going to take questions at the end. I know there's some questions that already started coming inbound into the Q&A panel, and we'll try to address those at the end. I want to make sure that you knew we were going to do that. Rich Bush is the Director of Professional Services Operations. I've known Rich for quite some time. They've been a wonderful customer of ours, and Rich, I think, is a good person to talk about this topic because in the last couple of years, he's gone through and driven a big transformation of their resource management operations, and he's here to talk a little bit more about that and his company. So with that, Rich, I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Great, thanks, Randy. Hey, everybody, if you could advance the slide, if you would. A little bit about Informatica. Informatica is the world's #1 independent provider of data integration software. We typically work with large organizations with large volumes of data and complex data transactions. We provide solutions around managing that data and those data flows for companies. We currently have about 400 in-house consultants and probably about another 40 to 50 subcontractors that we actively use as well. The practice revenue is somewhere around 100 million at the moment, so kind of right in the kind of the example company that Randy pointed to earlier. You can advance the slide, please. So what we did at a glance, we were probably a little late in rolling out our RMO. We had built and acquired a lot of complementary technologies around our core data integration technology, so we had become pretty diverse in the skill sets that we needed to deliver projects, and geographically diverse as we had expanded our operation quite a bit. And then at the same time, we were separating, or further separating, sales and delivery. So we had a lot of complex things going on at the same time, and our goal was to leverage the industry-leading practices and design and deploy an RMO utilizing just-in-time resources to help us achieve consistent utilization and to support the growth, the tremendous growth we've been seeing. And then the biggest benefit for us, or for the management team, was to be able to get reliable and accurate forecasting, because we've gotten to the point where it become impossible to rely on what we've been doing in the past and our siloed view of our resources to get an accurate forecast. So some of the highlights, we did leverage RTM Consulting to help us, well, first do an assessment of our current status, and then help us design and deploy our RMO. They helped us lead that project, and it's achieving more consistent and predictable resource utilization. We've also seen tremendous improvement in our visibility as far as supply and demand over a 3-month period, and our revenue forecasting as well. So some of the key benefits we saw, so we achieved more consistent utilization around our practice. We had definitely seen a greater variance in utilization before we had the RM. So to Randy's point earlier, we had a lot of people that were in the 20s and a lot of people that were in the 120s. So we have improved overall utilization, probably about 5 points, I'd say. But the bigger benefit is that we've stopped burning out those people at the top end, and we brought the people who are underutilized up to speed and gotten the skills they needed to get them staffed on jobs. We've seen vast improvement in the time needed to staff projects, so we were probably at a 3-week period in order to get a project staffed. We moved that down to about 1 week to 10 days. Saw continued improvement along that. We're now back to about 3 weeks, but that's because of the amount of business we have at hand. We're just extremely busy at the moment, and without the RM office, I don't know how we would be able to even get those staffed within the 3-week period at this point. The next point is the reduced project staffing time. The two are related. Obviously, we've reduced the administrative time that it takes to staff these projects, but we saw tremendous savings in the amount of time spent by our sales team and our project leadership team having to staff these projects. So that's time that they can focus on customer success and selling new opportunities. And then lastly, we have a tremendously reliable forecast view at this point. So we have a good 3-month outlook as to where people are, and our revenue forecast at this point is typically around a 95% accuracy at the onset of a quarter. So at the onset of a quarter, we can generally get within 95% of where we're going to be by the end of that quarter. And then if we go into the last month of the quarter, it's probably more like 98% accuracy at this point. You can advance the slide, Randy. Thanks. So what we learned, process discipline and change management are key. We wanted to define a clear documented set of processes, so we enlisted a lot of the parties involved in the sales and delivery team in a workshop to help us define the activities and responsibilities, to voice any concerns at that point. We then used the RMO construct to help break down some of the silos and provide some governance for process adherence. We obviously had a lot of individual practices, technology and geo-base where folks were responsible for small pools of resources. So we needed to put process in place that allow us to access a centralized RM. And then obviously in the process we had to anticipate a lot of these cultural challenges that are going to come about as a result of centralizing project staffing and taking that away from the hands of the sales and the delivery teams. On the staffing side, we put some rules in place so only resource managers can make the resource assignments and bookings. So from a permission perspective, we stopped using spreadsheets. All of the data for forecasting and for booking resources was out of the system, and the permissions in the system were such that we only allowed the resource managers the ability to make those bookings. We did allow for some named resources on the request side, but set the expectation that that would not be guaranteed. So there were places that we built fields in that you could make recommendations on somebody if they worked at a customer before or had some experience particular to that solution. But again, we did not guarantee that that would be the resource available. First to contract gets the resource, so this helped us in a lot of ways getting our paperwork in. Made sure that before we made a hard booking decision, and if there was a choice, we always went to where we had paperwork or contracts in place. Hard bookings always took priority over soft bookings, with possible exceptions for the extensions. So we're still working on some issues with extensions. We're trying to get that visibility sooner than later. That seems to be the last kind of area of challenge for us, is to try and get the project owners to get those extension requests in sooner than later so that we don't have to scramble and reassign people. But that's the one area we'll make exception and try and continue to have the named resources on those projects. And then real-time updates to resource requirements for opportunities and backlog of projects. And this is, again, where our PSA tool has really helped us. The managers and the ARM team can basically collaborate within the system to help update project requirements and bookings. Okay, Randy, next slide. So what we learned, forecasting side of things, we had basically defined when we would move a project from an opportunity, from a pipeline opportunity, when we would create that initial, we call it a proposed project. So it's at a point where we may not have all the paperwork in. It's not 100% yet, but it's at enough of a level of certainty where we want to start doing some what-if scenarios, staffing planning, to try and get those projects staffed so that we can get people out there just in time. So we had to look at that a little bit, and originally we were pushing projects at around 70%, but then we found that we were making too many changes during the process, so it's one area where we adjusted and switched that to be more 90%, or on some larger projects we'll push those over a little earlier as well. But it helps reduce the amount of change we were making. So we defined some rules around that. The other thing we had to do was define what definitions for probabilities within the opportunity stages were. So a lot of people had a different idea of what 70% was and what 90% was. So we quickly found that we had to build some rules around clear definitions around those opportunity stages as well. Define the key attributes you want to use to qualify your resource supply and demand, and make sure that on both the supply and demand side you're looking at the same key attributes. So for us, you can't obviously, we have requests for skills and a lot of various skills, but when we go to do reporting, we had to roll that up to some really high-level attributes that we want to be able to forecast supply and demand by. And so that's at a high level. There's different technology practices that we have, so we've qualified our resource supply and demand by those roll-ups of technology and as well as geo, so that we can have a good understanding of where in the world our demand and our supply resides. And then make sales part of your forecast governance. So we built, again, some rules around what our source documents were going to be for forecasting. We put some actual incentive, compensation incentives in place to ensure that they were compliant in filling out the booking requests, getting the SOW documents over, and doing a clean handoff with the delivery side of the house. So it was important, obviously, to get them involved so that we had a clean handoff and we had good data coming into the system up front from the opportunity. On the governance side, it's important to appoint someone to resolve resource conflicts, and early on to have somebody at an executive level most likely be that person, because there are going to be at least a lot of initial conflicts of what we feel is a strategic project or where we need certain resources. So you got to have a clear process defined and somebody in place who's going to make those decisions. We let consultants manage their schedule requests with regards to time off and training, and we needed to enforce compliance with that. So previously, managers knew who was off, but we didn't have any sort of visibility in the system until it was sort of the last week before those folks were taking time off. So now we've made them requirements for them to put that in through the system so that it updates the calendars, and we have requirements around how far in advance we need that to be in the system. It's important for consultants and the RM to update skills and resumes, so make sure you have a process in place to track and enforce those updates. So for us, we made that part of the two gates where we make that required. One is if somebody's getting certified in a new technology, before they can become certified in that technology, they have to update their skill resource profile within the PSA tool. And then annually, during the annual review process, it's a requirement for the annual reviews. And then lastly, create the resource and financial forecasts from the system, from your RM process, and make sure you use that to drive data quality. So early on, we had a lot of people say, well, I'm still managing my spreadsheet because it's more accurate. We said no. At the highest level, our VP of services said, no, we're using the system, so if it's not in the system, it's not real. And you pretty much have to take that stance, or else people won't get that data clean. They won't take time to make sure the data is updated. You won't be able to rely. Where we're headed, so we already actually rolled this out, an establishment of a RM dashboard, executive dashboard. So this is a place where our delivery and sales VPs can go to see 3-4 months out for supply and demand as far as resource requirements. They can see the revenue forecast. We actually have a worldwide map applet where it has basically dots all over the world of where our consultants are, and they can hover over and see who's at what customer, where in the world. And then there's detailed reports that come off of that the consultants can go and use and see maybe if there's somebody locally in the same city where they're at on a different project that they can get together or collaborate. And then secondly, the consultants enjoy that because they can see upcoming projects where they are and make requests if there's a project with a solution they want to learn or be involved with or in their local area. The RM employee and sales dashboard, it's very similar. It's what's coming up in my area, kind of talked about that. And our licensed sales team, our account executives like the tool as well because they know when consultants are at their customers. So they use that tool pretty frequently. Previously, they'd go in potentially to do a license sale and not be aware that our consulting team was on site working on a project at the same time. So it helps them understand where we are within their accounts. The last report I guess I want to talk about is the executive interlock report. So this is a regular monthly meeting we have with the VPs of sales and delivery where we go through some of the key statistics, forecast utilization, forecast demand, and it's a very powerful tool. It allows us to see where we have gaps coming up as far as skill gaps or resource gaps, and allows us to take a more proactive approach in either retraining folks into the skills we're going to need for upcoming projects or start the process of enlisting some subcontractors to fill those gaps. And then that leads into the subcontractor portal. So it's difficult for us. We have a good list of subcontractors who are in our system and their skills, and we know, who are the reliable contractors for a particular project need, but the problem is we don't really have a good update of their calendars. So we're working on a portal so that we can get them to load those calendars within our system. So not only we know who's available, but who has the right skill set if we need to rely on those third parties. And then lastly, a subcontractor marketplace where qualified subcontractors, partners can go in and see the same visibility, see what's coming up, and make a request or bid to work on those projects. Okay.
So, Thomas, I'm going to turn it back to you. Rich, thank you for your insights. That was really, really helpful, and we'll move into the Q&A section. So, Thomas, it's back to you.
Yep. Thanks, Rich, and thanks, Randy. We've got some questions that did come in during the webcast. I want to get right to those. And also on the screen now, you should see some information there necessary to claim your PDU for attending today's session, if you want to do that. So you will see our provider number there, the activity number for the course, et cetera, and you can write that information down and use that to claim your PDU. Okay, yeah, we did have some questions come in, Randy, some for you, even a few for Rich here, so I'd like to get started on that. This one came in, Randy, this one came in for you a little bit earlier from Brent when you were talking about silos. And he says, can you tell me a little more about breaking down silos by department, by geography, worldwide?
Yeah, I made the comment earlier that, when it comes to culture change, this typically comes up as one of the biggest barriers. And when I grew up in the technology industry, I was a manager. I owned resources. I managed them into projects and took them out of projects, and I got pretty comfortable with how things worked. But over time, when we kind of moved to the new world, where all of a sudden we had these lots of matrix organizations and lots of different things going on in organizations, you realize that you have to find a better way to start to utilize resources. And so back to this whole idea of the resources should no longer be, say, owned by a particular manager. They should be owned by the corporation who has transparent insight into where they are, what their availabilities, what their skill sets are. And the manager's role moves more to one of people development, growing, hiring, firing, administering raises, performance improvement, performance development. Yes, at times they do get involved in the project discussions, but the role of the manager in these cases is needs to shift to allow some kind of a centralized approach. So as Rich was talking about the RMO as an example, Resource Management Office ought to be at least the first stop. Try to figure out, okay, so here comes a project. How do I match that project with the right person to get them in the right place at the right moment in time? And it doesn't mean the manager is completely removed from it. It just means that the role has now changed relative to how do we decide to staff a project. And because the minute those resources get bottled up and managers control or own them, is we start to see the other behaviors which don't lend for efficient use of people. And it's, I try to protect a person. I keep them on the bench for a week because I think I'm going to need them for one of my projects, and or it's my favorite person, or he's my expert, and I want to be careful about where I put them. And those kind of behaviors are things that need to change in the organizations of today if they really want to get good at this. And so creating that transparent view, creating that centralized authority, in this case, Resource Management Office, is a big step. And culturally, it's a bit of a change for people. It's so, but again, the data is very compelling. It's where it gets done. Employees like it better. The financial performance is better, and project performance is better, and you can't argue with results.
Okay. We also had a couple questions here come in about culture change. One more generic that I'll give to you, Randy, and then afterwards I've got one for you too, Rich. This one comes in from Robin. She says, how do you convince senior management to support necessary culture change?
Yeah, that is a great question, because I think we all know in companies is senior management's not behind it. Sooner or later the initiative just dies on the vine. And so, what's good senior executives do respond to is results and performance and financial improvement, right? And so I go back to getting a good sense for where you are today. How am I using my resources? What does it cost me to do a typical project? What are my losses on quality because I couldn't start on time? Hiring costs. I'll get a good foundation for what you do. So when we, as an example, engaged Informatica, that's one of the things we started with was an assessment to try to get a baseline for where they are so they could then start to measure their improvements as they began to make their transformation. As soon as you can take that baseline and compare it to what good looks like and then show them the financial value of the gaps, is not too hard then to get senior management on board with what needs to happen culturally in order to achieve those kind of financial benefits. And generally speaking, the benefits are large. And so Rich mentioned about 5 points of utilization improvement. That's just one element of their financial performance. But I know how big this organization is. I can tell you that's a huge amount of money. And so most senior executives will respond to, it's going to cost me less to deliver, I'm going to get better quality, I'm going to get a better project performance, and armed with that data, generally speaking, you'll find them pretty malleable around the ideas of what do I have to change culturally to make this happen.
Okay. And Rich, kind of along that same idea, we had a question come in. How do you manage the necessary culture change at Informatica when you started this resource management transformation?
Yeah, well, initially, when we first put together the workshop to start to design the RMO, we made sure to enlist all the managers of the silos, if you will, within that process to make sure that they were fully aware and had a voice in the process and could kind of own it in a way. The other thing we quickly found is that we needed to change, obviously, compensation and incentives a little bit to take away from the project delivery side, less focus on revenue, more focus on overall utilization and customer success. So, and then, highlight the benefits to them as well. One of the key benefits is they'd spend significantly less time dealing with escalations, and we certainly had a lot of that, right before we rolled out the RMO. And I think that was, showing them the key benefits helps them become part of it and own it.
Okay. And I got another one here, Rich. This came in from Lynette. It says, how do you incent your services directors to help them focus on company success instead of their team's revenue and utilization?
Well, so I think I just touched on it. We did shift the on the delivery side a bit. We still have utilization targets, but we now it's more team-based at a higher level than just within their own teams. It's more within groups of technologies. And then additionally, we switched some of the compensation factors over to project success, customer success, and then within that, team development. So how much of your team has achieved new certifications within this period, and at what level? So we switched the compensation obviously a little bit to help mitigate some of those impacts from switching to the RMO.
Okay. Okay. And another one, Rich, came in regarding this resource management transformation, and she said she was curious what was the single biggest contributor you found in reducing the time during this process? Is there one single biggest?
It's hard to say, but I guess the biggest one is to not have, when we had sales and delivery parties, we had people who were focused on this at different times. To have one person focused on getting a project staffed and not have to worry about back and forth conversations between managers and sales team. Whether it be through system or process, that's really the biggest driver of success here.
Okay, Randy, I got one I'm going to throw to you, and this one's around forecasting. Andre wants to know, how do you get sales on board with wanting to help with forecasting? He struggled with that. Are you muted, Randy?
Yeah, sorry about that. I was a sales manager for a period of my career, and as well as a salesperson, and so I really understand that the behaviors and drivers of a salesperson, and salespeople generally respond to things that make their customers happier, all right, or make your company more responsive to their customers. And so, generally speaking, I always kind of looked at forecasting as a chore that I didn't really enjoy too much, and I only did it when my boss asked me. And then when the PS group came and asked me for it, I was like, are you kidding me, right? So, but as soon as I understood and could see from the other side, hey, look, for the delivery team to be effective at helping you get the best people in the right place at the right moment in time, that was when the light went on for me, that it's taking the time to educate the sales team as to let me tell you, if you give me this information, let me tell you what you're going to get back for it. And, you give me, on a regular basis, help me making sure I understand the demand, out 6 months as accurately as we possibly can, is I will do a much better job for you of making sure I got a better talent available on a more timely basis to produce a better project outcome every time we do a project. And generally speaking, salespeople like those things, and now they understand what they're getting back for it. And a culture change plan that I strongly recommend is that we all know in every organization there are certain people known as the sales leaders or the floor leaders, or the people that the other salespeople tend to follow. So those are the ones you want to go get. Go get those salespeople educated and get them to embrace helping you with the forecasting process. And most cases, once you do that, it will cascade down and you get the sales organization generally much more supportive of what you're trying to accomplish.
Okay, great, thank you. Rich, we had one come in about the PSA tool you're using. David wants to know which system you're using, and how did the centralized RMO influence your selection?
So we actually had the PSA tool in place before we rolled out the RMO. We go with OpenAir, NetSuite OpenAir. So part of our workshop involved bringing that team in. So as we were designing the workflows and the requirements to make sure we had representation from the PSA, so what we were designing was feasible and how we would achieve that within the system. But I highly recommend going the other way if at all possible.
Right. Let's see. This one came in from Tina. Do you have guidelines or rules set around allocation percentage for a resource? For example, the capacity and the availability to assist other projects, etc. Do you guys do that?
Yeah. Oh, are you asking Informatica or are you asking me?
I think this is probably better for Rich here.
Okay. Well, go ahead, Rich.
It really depends on the nature of the technology. With certain areas of technology, for us anyway, involve a lot of long-term projects, whereas other technologies we roll out are more short-term in nature and can be done remote or more remotely. So there is, as far as pre-sales or support for escalation goes, we do typically allocate a certain number of hours for each of the key resources that we know we're going to need. But we try to limit that within a week. Obviously, things happen and that changes and we have to shuffle resources around, but we do have some basic rules built around that.
Okay. Randy, I didn't mean to cut you off there. I didn't know if you had anything to add.
No, I think that was, as I'm reading it, I think it's a good specific question to him. What he's doing is, what they're doing here, I think, is pretty typical of what we do see. And I don't know if there was any element of utilization targets, in that question, but generally speaking, we see organizations will set targets for billable utilization depending on the kind of work that people do. So if you're a developer, you expect a higher utilization rate than you might expect for a business consultant in the organization. But anyway, it was interesting to hear Rich's answer there. So.
Yep. Okay. Very good. Okay, guys. I got about a minute here on mine, so I'm going to be respectful of everybody's time here and do a hard stop here at the top of the hour. There were a few questions left, and we will work to get those answered and follow up with you guys via email. Again, this session was recorded, so there will be a follow-up email going out. You'll be able to listen to that at your convenience. But with that, I want to conclude the webinar. I want to thank Rich. Appreciate your time and insight today, and Randy as well. Thank you for your time today.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Thomas. And Rich, thank you again for your participation and sharing your insights with the group.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anybody has any follow-up questions, you can feel free to share my information as well. I'd be happy to take that.
Perfect. Okay. Appreciate that, Rich. Okay, guys, and with that, we will conclude today's webinar. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and have a great day.